Good morning, everybody. Man, I'm glad to be here. Hey, give them another round of applause. Are they not amazing? That's my favorite worship band in the world. Man, that song, like, how many times have you been in the middle of a storm and needed a song to sing, huh? And if you can sing that song, if you can give God praise during that storm, doesn't that change everything right there? Isn't that where change begins? Speaking of change, it's very wet outside, but who had a blast last week at church at the park? Who had fun? Who would like to do that again? That was something else. I feel like I got this thing on upside down. It's really bothering me. Okay. So I've spent the last several months, I'm a slow learner, but I've spent the last several months studying David. Who loves King David? Yes, isn't he just amazing, right? He's got such an amazing life, but studying David did something that I really wasn't expecting to do for me. It helped me change my mind about the way I look at things when I make a mistake. Who here makes mistakes? Yes. Hey, would you like to change your mind about how you feel about yourself when you make a mistake and how you think God looks at you when you make a mistake? Would you like to be able to do that? Because it helped me do that. It helped me lay aside some of the condemnation that I feel, when I make a mistake. And I use that condemnation, guys, and you do as well. It's unhealthy, that condemnation. We use it to really hold ourselves back. We use it as an excuse to not do the things that we need to be doing in life and not. It's just an excuse, guys, and it's unhealthy, this condemnation. We shouldn't place that on us because Christ himself said there's no condemnation in him, right? And so I wanted to share with you what I'm learning because it helped me erase some doubts, right, about some callings in my life, and I want to erase some doubts for you. And so I just thought that the best thing that I could do right now is just to simply share with you what I'm learning. Would that be all right with you? So several times in my life, I've asked God what his will for me is several times. And I'm honestly, for the bigger picture, I'm kind of still trying to figure that out. But if you haven't noticed, I'm excited about everything, and I want to be a part of it all. But I've often asked God to give me something to do. And I'll be the first to tell you that he never has a hard time finding something to do. There's always somewhere to serve. There's always something to do. And all of it's equally important. You need to understand that picking up trash, I'm supposed to stay close to this podium, guys. I'm sorry. So you ought to understand that picking up trash is equally as important as standing here doing what I'm doing right now, right? You need to understand that going over to the children's church before 10 a.m. when they're praying over our kids and to pray with them is just as important as standing up there singing worship music. You need to understand that going to Third Thursday like Charles and Charlie do so faithfully and going and helping and serving there is one of the most important things that you can do in this church. The person who picks up trash outside is as important as the person who stands up here. And if you don't believe me, stop picking up trash for a while and see if we have anybody here to come and listen to us speak. Right? Everything is important. Everything in the service to God, everything that we do in our own lives, even the details, they're very, very important, and we need to understand that. And so I just want to help us all kind of understand that it doesn't matter what the thing is, and I kind of touched on this last week. God needs you. We need you. And we need you to serve, and I want to help you see today why you need you to serve. Will that be all right? All right, so I hesitate to share this, but it's relative to what I'm trying to get across today. And this is kind of personal and just kind of awkward to talk about, but I've how do I say this? I feel like I've been called several times in my life to speak. And I feel like that's awkward because honestly, like there's many of you in here far more talented speakers than I am, but I need to tell you this. I needed to tell you this to kind of put this together. See, many of you don't know, but not long after I was saved, literally weeks after I was saved, I was sitting in this little bitty church house, and we were probably my second or third Sunday school there, and we were sitting around this table, and my wife and I, we were the youngest ones there, to the tune of the next step up from us was about 65, and And there was 5 or 6 teenagers that went to church there, most of them about to graduate. Some needed a couple, 2 or 3 years. And we're sitting there at this table, and we're doing Sunday school, and all of a sudden one of the ladies says, you know what we need? I've been going to church for a couple weeks, guys. They said, you know what we need is we need a young man to come in there and just really teach those kids and help those kids. And then the back of my neck got hot, and the top of my head got hot, and I looked up, and they were all staring at me. And I guess that was me. And if you want to know the truth, I was the obvious candidate, because just like I said, I was the youngest one there. The next up was 65 years old, and he thought that he might have a hard time relating to those teenagers. And another reason was I'm loud. So it was pretty obvious they needed a loud guy, and I could read. And that was about it, honestly. That was the criteria, and that's what made me the obvious candidate. But, I honestly didn't have a clue what I was doing. I did not have one clue. I would simply teach those kids what I was learning at the time, and all I was learning at the time was just how to be a Christian. I didn't know. I had started in a different place, and maybe that's why they talked to me there, because I asked a lot of questions. If you had noticed, I'd do that. I talk a lot. I ask a lot of questions, but at that point in time, I'd kind of done some searching through the Bible, and I'd read the Bible in its entirety before I was saved, really. And I was searching for some answers concerning my mom's suicide, and so I'd spent some time in the Bible. I knew what the Bible said, but I had no clue how to apply it to my life at the time. But despite my knowledge and my skills and what I could do, God was able to use me, right? I was just serving where there was a need, right? And then one day, there in that same church, that the pastor was gone, and the elder that had been filling in for him was sick. And so there we were, the entire congregation sitting in church, nobody to preach to us, and it was really uncomfortable and awkward for all 8 of us. And finally one of them said, "Cory, you get up there." And I didn't know what else to do, so I got up there and I read Psalms to them. I just read Psalms out of the Bible. But God found a way to use me right where I was at, right? And he needs to use you, and you need him to use you right where you're at. And for the same reason that day I was the obvious candidate, right? But what the thing was, though, is it always happened without my effort, right? I didn't try, right? I didn't try like to get in those positions, and therefore I kind of felt like they were a fluke, right? Like it was an accident, a coincidence, because, if you believe in God, you probably don't believe in coincidences, and I don't either. So anyways, and can I tell you something else? I ended up preaching there and pastoring that little church for a little while they were looking for the guy to become their full-time pastor, and that's where I was pastoring when I left and moved to Missouri and took a job with Empire. And the guy that they hired there is still there today, so bless his heart. But I've thought about those people a lot, and my theology was so bad. If they happen to be watching right now on Facebook, I'm sorry. Like, I probably owe you an apology. But I've always ignored it and disqualified myself because of what it took for me to get there, right? And then throughout the years, I just kind of let it go, and I would say, I'm no preacher, I'm no speaker, I'm no talker, but in the back of my mind, I knew I was lying, because I love to talk. I love to share things with you guys, right? I love to help people, and I know that I laugh about it, but I do have a big voice in this little bitty body, and God keeps presenting opportunities for me to teach and speak, right? And so, but the point that I'm trying to make, though, is God was able to use me right where I was, right at that time, despite my abilities, despite my, what I knew how to do, despite my track record, despite the fact that I wasn't raised in a church. And I've noticed that things haven't really been a lot different since I've been here. I came here and I just wanted to add value. I just wanted to help. And I always sought ways to help. And to be honest, and you've heard me mention this date before, and I'll mention it again probably several times, but I was needing help. I was needing some help. I was needing friends. I was needing support. I was needing a family. And I prayed to God, because, man, I'm broken and I need some help, God. Like, I hear about all these things that you're doing in other people's lives. Well, why isn't it that I'm seeing it in mine? And I prayed and asked him, like, how do I get this help? And he told me, this was June 5th of last year, he told me, go serve. That's all he said. And I started showing up and asking what I could do, and I haven't stopped since. And what's happened, and I've told you before, God gave me that support system. Because I'm in here trying to help you, I forgot about my problems. Because I'm in here trying to see how I can serve you. And I'm not patting myself on the back. This all has a point, right? This all has a point. I'm not patting myself on the back. This isn't me, but I live with me, and my stories are the only ones I know how to tell, right? But anyways, he kept giving me ways to serve. And pretty soon, like I've got my hand in all over the place, and it's been phenomenal because I've made such great friends. God's raised up a family for my family right here. And I'm so grateful to you, and as appropriate this might be or might not be, I wish that you would just give yourself a round of applause, because you're amazing, and I thank you. But that's what I've done, and he's found so many amazing ways to use me, and he's given me you as a support system, and somehow me needing you, God placed me, in a place where I have an opportunity now to help you, through the things that I've gone through in life and the things that I've learned. And a couple of months ago, I kind of started feeling that nagging again that I needed to speak. And I put God to the test. I said, God, it's been a long time since I spoke. If you want me to speak, then you're going to have to open the opportunity up for me. And within like a week later, I had 4 opportunities to speak, 3 of them that I took. And so I thought, man, there's something to that. But it happened so easily. There again, I just voided it off. I disqualified myself, right? And then I was so embarrassed by my performance. I was so embarrassed by what I did up here, and how, the fact that I was walking back and forth like this, and like I feel like this time I should have had a rope on here after Keith and Hank joked with me. But anyways, I was really embarrassed. I felt like I was all over the place. I felt like I didn't get my point across to you. And for about the first 50, and I'm not even joking, you guys are so amazing. About 50 of you came up to me just within the first 48 hours and just told me how much my talk on gratitude helped you. And I thank you. The first 50 of you I thought were lying. I'll just be honest. And that's what we do to ourselves, right? Why do we do that? Why do we always disqualify ourselves, right? But that was it. It all came so easy, and I felt like I performed so poorly that I just wrote it off again, right? And so several weeks ago, I was back in the same place. Like I always return, guys, to the same place, the same thoughts, and it was just a few weeks ago, right? And I said, Lord, if you're really calling me to speak, like, give me the opportunity to. And then 48 hours later, I had the opportunity to speak 3 more times, today being the 3rd. All right? And now I'm telling you all this, right? Because this is relative to what I've learned in David. But so God has, though, guys, I do want to confess, like, even though I don't feel qualified, and this isn't the only stage that I want to speak on, but I don't feel qualified, but God has given me an amazing and incredible life. He's given me some amazing experiences, right? And even when I didn't know who God was, I can look back now in my life back then, and I could see him equipping me with all these tools to help everybody, right? To help people. I don't want to burst your bubble when you're thinking I'm not qualified, but you're no different than me, right? You have lived an amazing life yourself, and God has equipped you with so much to share with people, right? And he takes us through these things, guys. He takes us through these experiences in our life so we are equipped to help one another, correct? And so I just want you to know, like, I believe this. I believe this with everything in me, that I believe that we're all gifted. I believe that we're all amazing, and I believe that we're all inspiring and energizing. And I believe that most of us wouldn't believe that if somebody told us about it. But I believe it is quite the miracle to even believe a segment, just a fraction of that. Just a fraction to know how miraculous you are and how amazing your life is and how valuable you are. That is a miracle to know in and of itself. Would you agree? Who thinks that they lived an amazing life? Come on. Just 2 of you, 3 of you? Come on. Hey, you have lived an amazing life, and you need to know that. You need to own that, right? But when God assigns a calling to you, I just told you about this thing where I asked God to show me something, and within 48 hours, he answered me. Within 48 hours, like he showed me. But who knows that it doesn't always happen that way? It doesn't, guys. Like, not at all. And that's what I want to talk about today. You know, sometimes when God puts something in your heart, you know, and he gives you a dream, he gives you a vision, he even gives you a calling, sometimes you go a long time without seeing it, right? And I think all that he really requires of us in that time is just to be willing, though, right? Just be willing. And that's what I want to do. I just want to be willing. I'm not sure where he's going to turn and take me. I just want to be willing. That way I can go there when he does, right? But sometimes when God makes a promise, we know it doesn't happen right then. And as a matter of fact, there's been times in my life where I thought, man, like I'm wrong, or I messed it up, or I didn't make a good decision. Now he's taking that dream away from me. But did you know that, now this is where it wraps back around to David. Did you know that David was anointed king and then had to wait a long, long time before he actually put the crown on his head? Did you know that his anointing to be king actually happened before he ever met Goliath? You know that? Did you know that even before he met Goliath, like, first off, and different than Joseph, David, it was no secret when he was anointed king, right? So just picture this. Picture this. You're lined up here with all your brothers and your sisters and your mom and your dad and a couple people in your tribe down the road, the neighbors, and this old man named Samuel is going through here, and he's saying, not you, not you, not you, not you. It's none of y'all. We're missing one. Where's he at? Hey, could you imagine standing there amongst your brothers and sisters when one of them had to go to the field and pick you up? Say, come on, God's wanting you. Could you imagine that? No? Hey, like, I would love that feeling, and I love my sisters, right? But come on, wouldn't that feel good? Just a little bit? Wouldn't that feel good? Like, oh, he wants me, does he? Oh, man. Hey, I think it would feel amazing. But David got to enjoy that. He wasn't like Joseph, and he didn't have to convince them of anything. God stood him right there in front of his family, in front of his tribe, and said, he's the one. He's the one that I want. You know, and not only that, but God reminded us of why he wanted him in that. God reminded us that we look at the outside, and here's his brothers all lined up better looking than him, taller and stronger, and little old David. We all have that picture of David, right? Little old David comes out of the woods and walks up there with his shepherd's staff, and they pick him, you know, and that's great. That's fine. And then they all celebrate, whether they wanted to celebrate him or not. And they all had a good time. Good job, David. They're getting the high fives. And then Jesse, David's dad, he walks back up to him and says, all right, son, congratulations. Go back out to the sheep. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine that? You just been anointed king, and then they're like, all right, good for you, Mr. Royalty. Now get back to the fields, please. Go back to being a labor hand. How many times in your life, though, were you certain that God told you to do something? And you started doing it, and you found yourself right back where you were when you started. Has that ever happened to you? Yes. Yes, it's happened. Did you feel confused when that happened to you? What did I do wrong? Look, I know that the Lord told me that he wanted me to be an entrepreneur. He wanted me a businessman, to be a businessman. He wanted me to help people through the skills that I gain in business. He wanted that. I know that. I know that. There's no doubt. But I am telling you, over the past decade, I have failed so many times. And so many times I've thought to myself, are you sure? Am I really doing this right? Is this really what you were calling me to do? Like, what is wrong? You know, maybe I misunderstood you, Lord. Like, there's been times in my life where the winds were stacked so deep, and I'm like, yep, I got it now. I'm never going back there again. And somehow I found a way to fail anyways, and I'm back there again, starting over, starting a new business, launching a new business. And, you know, you can't help but think, well, maybe I misunderstood the Lord, you know. But you think that maybe that's what David was thinking when he was on his way back out to meet the sheep? Some of you may not know this. Well, But before David went to meet Goliath, he was summoned by Saul to go play an instrument for him when he was stressed out. David's worship music was so strong that he got to go play for the king. He played his harp, he played his lyre. And then he graduated from that and became an armor bearer. Still hadn't met Goliath. So when it was time for him to go meet Goliath, well, David had to come out of the shepherd's fields again. He came out from being a shepherd after being he's been in the palace. He's been in the palace serving the king. He's become the king's armor bearer. He's found a way to serve there. And he's still out in the field serving his dad's animals and his family's animals. And now he comes out and he goes and he's sent by his dad as a servant again to go bring some stuff to his brothers and find out what's going on. And this is where David meets Goliath. And some of you might remember the conversation. I won't say it right, someone will find it here. The conversation that him and his brother had when David was asking about Goliath. His brother got kind of snarky with him, kind of rude. And he said, "Why have you come down here? And who did you leave the sheep with in the wilderness? And I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is." I think Bubba remembered the time where he got anointed right there to be king in front of him. You think maybe Bubba was just a little bit jealous? Maybe that would explain why he's so aggravated there, right? But those things that his brother said about him, maybe they were true. Maybe David did have some of that in his heart. But do you think that those are the same things that God saw in his heart when he referred to David? Like it says in Acts 13:22, he says, "I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything that I want him to do." A man after my own heart. You mean the wicked, conceited David? A man after my own heart. I find it amazing that they could say that about him, and then God can say that about him. I wonder what God's saying about you. Also found it quite amazing that he was anointed as king before he faced his giant. And I don't know why, because it seems like in the way I process things, that when you face the giants on the way to the kingship, right? Like you get anointed king after you defeat the giant. Doesn't that make sense? That's the way the movies work, right? That's the way I saw it on TV. But David, he became anointed as king, and he kept serving, and then he had to face his giant, and he faced him, and it was the first giant, but not the last giant, by the way, that he ever faced. But 1 Samuel 17:48, it tells us that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. And he did this fueled by these words declared over this giant. And I could just imagine David, little David. You know, I figure he's probably about my size. He's a little guy. And I decided to figure that because that's what I want to believe, right? I wanted to relate to David. I think he's awesome. So, but in verse 45, he tells the giant as he is running to the line, he tells him, he says, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head." Man, I love that he told him that before he declared his victory. I love that. But before I go any further, like I just want to, because I was just talking about David's appearance, I want to get this out of the way. I think many of us think of David as this cute little blonde frail boy that sits out there in the fields playing his harp. Or the only other picture we might have of him is that same cute little blonde frail boy standing like this on that giant laying on the ground, and he's got his empty sling in his hand and 4 smooth stones left over in his pouch, in his shepherd's pouch. And those might be somewhat accurate, but let me tell you something about David. He was a warrior, right? David was a warrior. And those words, they don't come from just any normal person. Those words come from the heart of a warrior, right? But imagine if we use those words in our life. Like, imagine you come against me with cancer and pain and fear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of my health. Huh? You come against me with debt and cash drain and emergencies, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of my finances. You come against me with addiction to drugs and alcohol, But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of my strength, you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will overcome you. I will cut you off, and any chance of you being passed down through generations of my family. Look, we can use those words, and we can declare our victory right now before we face the things that we have to face. And David did exactly what he said he was going to do to Goliath, didn't he? You know, and then the cute little blonde boy, picture this, the cute little blonde boy pulled that huge sword out of the sheath, and he walked up there and he chopped that giant's head off. And then that cute little blonde boy carried around that severed head for a while. That's not weird, is it? What a cute, right? But he did. Man, David was a warrior. He was a savage. And I can't help but think that if I was writing the story, this is where it ends. Like, they'd be following behind David singing, oh, David killed the 10,000s, and they'd usher him into the palace, and David would go up into the palace and stand in front of the throne, and they'd put the throne on his head, and he'd kick back, and we'd all live happily ever after. I believe that's the way I'd tell the story. But that's just not how it happened with David. Because once David finished that battle, guess what happened next? More battles. David had more battles, and I mean a lot more battles. As a matter of fact, David, and I told you this, he waited between 7 and 15 years from the first time that he was anointed till the time that he was actually king of all of Israel. Right? All of it. Right? 7 to 15 years. Much of that time was spent with David either hiding as a refugee, serving because he was a servant, right? Or fighting because he was a warrior, right? And the weirdest thing is the most powerful person that he served, Saul, wanted to kill him, right? Because Saul could feel it slipping through his fingers, and he could see in David the qualities that he didn't have in himself, and it made him mad, right? It made him confused. He didn't know how to act like, and he was so confused. If you'll read 1st and 2nd Samuel, you'll see how confused Saul was, even with his own wanting to kill David. He didn't even understand his emotions. So many times Jonathan or somebody would talk him down and say, this David's never done anything to you, and Saul would back off and think, man, what's wrong with me? And then he'd go right back to it again, right? And it was, you know, and David wasn't just Saul. Like, David spent his lifetime being chased down by the ones that he loved, right? And so, you know, Saul did all kinds of things. He chased him into caves and crooks and crannies, and he threw his spear at him several times, trying to pin him to the wall, the Bible says, you know, and yet David still went and served him. He'd come out of hiding and go and serve him in the palace with just a simple apology. I don't know if I could do that, but David was a servant. And I want to believe maybe that's why God said David was a man after his own heart, right? David was chased down. He was betrayed by the people that he served. He was betrayed by his family members. And he went through battle after battle after battle to become king, right? And even though God himself had said that he was king, he still had to go through this long journey and these extremely horrible circumstances and battle after battle after battle, all in fulfillment of the Lord's promise. I'm spitting everywhere. I hope y'all can't see that. Anyways, but I want you to know that when God has something amazing for you to do, you need not be surprised when the devil starts attacking. Right? Hey, look, man. Like, if you're not doing nothing, I once had a boss tell me, I was pumping gas wells at the time, and I was parked on the side of this pad, and I was reading the meter, and as I went to back up, I put it in reverse, and it was so muddy, I slid off, and when I backed off, I can't remember what it was, but I clipped the edge of the truck with something, so I had to drive back up to the shop, and I showed the owners of the company, and I said, look at here, showed them the dent in the fender, and they just laughed and said, Cory, at least you're doing something. He says, if you don't tear something up, it usually means you're not doing anything. And I just smiled because I felt like it was permission, you know. And he says, no. But anyways, but if you're not doing anything, you can expect to not face any opposition. And so if things are good and easy for you right now, you might consider looking and seeing if you're doing the things that you should be doing. Because it's really not supposed to be that simple here, guys. Like, this isn't vacation, this is life, right? Right? But what you need to understand is what God put in. It's the same thing that David understood. What God put in you, he will fulfill. He will. And you don't have to worry about how anybody else feels about it. And you don't have to worry about how anybody else would do it, because God clears that path for you, right? All you have to do is be willing and maximize the gifts that God has put in you, right? And if you want to figure out what your life's purpose is, I implore you right now, serve. It was the best thing that I ever chose to do in my life, was to serve. Right now, right where you are, serve, find a way, right? But and that's, like I said, I believe that that's why God chose David, because he was a servant at heart. Psalm 78, 70 through 72, it says, he chose David as servant and took him from the sheep pens, from tending the sheep. He brought him to be the shepherd of his people Jacob, of Israel, his inheritance. And then 72 goes on to say, and David shepherded them with integrity of heart. With skillful hands he led them. What a testament, right? But I believe it's because of the training that David received. I believe it was because of that training during that amount of time that David was able to be what he says there in verse 72, right? And so don't worry, like we need to be what I'm looking for. You need to make sure not to worry about like all these details, and not to be looking at it and saying, like, look, if God's got a plan for you, it's going to come to fruition. You don't have to worry about a platform, guys. You don't have to worry about a position, because God will put that together for you. It's more about serving the purpose that he's put in front of you right now, right where you are, right? And David knew that God would honor the promise that he promised David. And David did what he could do by honoring the process. And it's on us, guys, to honor the process, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So how many times have you tried to, and here's a great example of it, how many times have you tried to be in God's will for you, and then something quite didn't work out? Like me, whenever I see God's will for me, and I can see I finally get a picture of where he's sending me, I have an awesome ability to find a shortcut every time. But I take that shortcut every time. I'm still not learned, and it still takes the same amount of time, because God still has to do the same things, right, to prepare me. And so I just want you to know, like, just do the things that God's put in front of you to do right now. All right? If you're cleaning toilets for the Lord, clean toilets for the Lord. Okay? It doesn't matter, right? Do the things that he put in front of you. And David chose to trust in God, and he trusted in God's process, right? And so David knew Saul's time was coming to a close. And I find this very interesting. David knew that God put Saul where he was, and he was not willing to take it into his own hands to change the way it went. There was several times when he could have, like once, my favorite part here, once David was hiding from Saul in a cave, right? Him and his army, they were hiding in this cave. Saul is after him, trying to kill him again. And all of a sudden, unknowingly, here comes Saul into the mouth of the cave. And he comes strolling in. Probably shouldn't share that. He comes strolling in, and he turns his back to David, and he pulls up his robe, and he commences taking a dump. It's the truth. If you don't believe me, read 1 Samuel 24:3. He says Saul relieved himself. And David went up, which was a dirty job, but David went up, and he cut the corner off of his robe. And he kept it, and then his conscience got to him. Now David, what an honorable man, his conscience got to him, and he let Saul know, hey, I spared your life. I've got this piece of your robe, but I didn't take your life into my hands, because I'm an honorable man. And I got to be honest, like, not only would I have killed him, but I'd have made sure he fell back in his mess. Like, man, come on. Like, he was so sorry. But David was an honorable man, right? He had the faith to wait until God made the way, right? And so I want us to think about that in our own lives, because there's a lot of us, who are working and we're fighting to get that position. Maybe you want a position at the church. Maybe you want a better position at your job, but there's somebody there in a position that you want, right? And I want us to think about this. Like, do you really want somebody to give you that position because you've been backbiting, because you've been talking behind their back, because you're unwilling to help them, because you're resentful, because you've been waiting for them and ushering, making sure their life's miserable on their way out the door? Do you really want the reason you got the position because you wouldn't quit whining and being offended and they just needed to shut you up? You don't want that, right? You see, the thing about David that we need to understand, it's God will place you where he promises you. And it's not just how you it's not just that you get there, guys, but it's how you get there. Right? You want to get there with integrity, right? Serve where you are. You'll get there with integrity. Your time will come. You don't need to force these things. You don't need to pursue these things relentlessly. Go serve those same people who are in the positions that you want. See what happens, right? And that's how you honor the process, right? Believe Philippians 1:6 when it says, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Do you trust God with the outcomes like David did? I often don't. I'll be really, really honest. I often don't. I'm learning how to more and more every day. And it's nice, though. I'm finding in my life these things that I would have been stressed about, I have peace. Right? But I wanted to let you know, just in case you didn't know, the outcomes. David went on to take the crown, right? Go David! He lived a life full of wins. He did. But you know what else he did? He lived a life full of struggles, right? He had worry. He sinned, believe it or not. He had a ton of waiting that he had to do even after getting the crown, right? He had fear. He had losses. And they were all mixed with these victories that he had. We think about the victorious David, but we forget, like David meant well and did wrong, just like us. He made bad decisions just like us. Today we would frown on it. David had a ton of wives and a ton of concubines. He had kids by I don't know how many different wives. We wouldn't like that today. Back then there was a political reason for some of that. He committed the infamous Bathsheba affair that led to the murder of Uriah, the murder that he staged. Isn't that funny how sin grows, by the way? He wanted to hide committing adultery, so he murdered. That didn't make sense, does it? He not only killed, but he mutilated men, women, and children when he would go and defeat these towns, right? Once, in order to marry Saul's daughter, Michal, Saul told him that he wanted 100 Philistine foreskins. David, that cute little blonde Christian boy, thought he'd go above and beyond the call, and he brought back 200. Oh, it's just disgusting. But this is David. Like he's just a person, right? That sweet, heart-playing Christian boy come back with 200 foreskins to get a wife, right? And despite paying those 200 foreskins, you might know that Saul gave her to somebody else. And paint another picture, I found this when I was reading in 2 Samuel or 1 Kings, but when David was finally crowned king, one of the first things that he did was go and get Michal back. Even though she was hateful and mean, he went and took his wife back, and it says that her husband was going behind them crying, begging David not to. Kind of paints a different picture of that little heart-playing blonde boy, doesn't it? His family fell apart. David's family fell apart even while he had the crown, while he had the throne. His sons tried to kill him. His own sons tried to kill him. His army had to kill his sons, some of them. He had his sons sleep with all of his concubines. And then David felt the need to take those same women and stick them in a house and keep them closed up for the rest of their life to never be touched again. Little blonde David was a warrior. He was a sinner. He was a servant. He was a murderer. worshiper, right? But I told you all this about David. Maybe you can think about this a little differently now. Because before I said all that about David, and you're thinking, man, David's bad. You was thinking that you was too messed up to be used by God. Wasn't you? Like, but the things that I do, the things that I've done, the things that I've said, the pain that I've caused people, is it possible that God sees what he's put inside of you when he's looking at you? Is it possible that he sees your good intentions? Is it possible that he sees what you meant to say, what you meant to do? Is it possible that God sees that completed work? It's more than possible. There was a man named Jesus. When God looks at us, he sees the blood of his son, and he sees us as perfect. And I'm about to wrap up, guys. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. It's right at 12. But I just want to give you freedom. Be okay with you. To serve right where you are. To know that even though it doesn't look like what you think God's called you to do, you're not messing it up right now. And it's still coming to fruition. Just going through some training. Just getting ready. Right? God's got some big things planned for you and for me. He's got some big things planned for Central Christian Center. Doesn't he? Hey guys, have you looked around at what's going on here? Is this not an exciting time to be here? Who's excited about Central Christian Center right now? Hey guys, I didn't give them time to make it up here, but I really don't have anything else. If this reached you, if this helped you at all, like I just want to give you permission to just go do the things that's on your heart, right? That's just simply that. I want to give you permission to go serve. I want to give you permission to let go of that condemnation. I want to give you permission to enjoy the salvation that you have been given freely, and sometimes it seems way too easy. Like to me, being able to pray and say, Lord, I want to be saved, come into my life, I'll make you my king. That just seems too easy. That's because we always want to do the work. The work's been done. We get to enjoy it, right? All right, guys. Hey, thank you so much for having me today. Let me speak to you. Let me share with you. I love you guys. Thank y'all so much.